45. See you then.
Good evening, this is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Nick Trubridge in for Lisa Owen. E haere nei, not justified in a free and democratic society. Grounded Kiwis wins its case against the government over the MIQ system. The High Court says it operated unjustly and unfairly, unable to prioritise those with the greatest need. A probe into port deaths is ordered, but what will it achieve? We'll go live to Littleton. 15 to 20 ram raids a week. Dairy owners are crying out for help. The police respond. Shocked and gutted, Auckland Zoo's boss joins us to tell us why Australia Zoo reneged on a deal to take Burma. And we fill up and take a tour around Costco's much anticipated New Zealand store. You can catch us live on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50 and Sky Channel 421.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Madi, I'm Evie Ashton. The government's COVID response has taken a huge knock, with a High Court ruling the MIQ system was unfair. Justice Mallon says it was inevitable the system would operate unjustly when demand exceeded supply. Amy Williams reports.
Thousands of New Zealanders were stranded overseas because of the way managed isolation worked. The lobby group Grounded Kiwis mounted a legal challenge, arguing the room release system was unlawful and in breach of the Bill of Rights. The High Court says MIQ did not sufficiently allow individual circumstances to be considered and prioritised, and the emergency allocation categories were too tight. The ruling paves the way for a judicial review.
The National Party says the government shouldn't appeal the ruling. Its COVID response spokesperson, Chris Bishop, says it's a massive victory for all New Zealanders who wanted to come home but couldn't.
Today is judicial confirmation of the fact that MIQ was a lottery of human misery and state-sponsored cruelty on an industrial scale, and it's a massive vindication for the grounded Kiwis.
The government says it's considering the court's decision. The Minister for Workplace Safety is telling the country's port network to pull itself together after 2 workplace deaths in a week. Michael Wood has ordered the Transport Accident Investigation Commission to look into the deaths. He says he's doing everything he can to ensure that ports are safe places to work.
As Minister, I'm taking responsibility to contact every single one of these organisations to request assurance from them that they are reviewing all of their procedures in these safety critical areas. So as I say, every reasonable step that I can take and that my agencies can take, we will take.
Maritime New Zealand and WorkSafe will also assess the country's 13 major ports. Dairies are reporting as many as 20 ram raids around the country each week. 3 more stores were targeted in the Auckland suburbs of Titirangi and Maitangi Bay last night. 3 cars ram raided the Ormiston town centre in East Tamaki the night before, and a group of men used a weapon to smash into West City Mall in Waitakere. The chair of the Dairy and Business Owners Group, Sunny Koshal, says retailers shouldn't have to fork out for private security or self-defence lessons, as some are doing.
Businesses are not safe, the properties are not safe, the workers are not safe, the residents are not safe, our visitors are not safe, our communities are living in fear. So what is happening in New Zealand? And somebody needs to be held accountable here.
Sunny Koshal says lawmakers and authorities need to show some steel. The National Party says a discussion about climate change and how to manage property and other assets has been a long time coming. The government is seeking feedback on a 6-year plan to prepare for the impact of climate events on households and communities. National's climate change spokesperson, Scott Simpson, says it's a difficult conversation, but one that has to be had.
And it's better that we're having it later rather than not at all. What surprises me is that for a government that professes to be so focused on climate action, that they have been so late to the adaptation conversation.
Scott Simpson says National would want to see specific legislation before making any decision about support. And the Assistant Children's Commissioner has praised a woman who's inviting those who insulted her to learn more about her mokokauai. Jay Scott was with her 4 children when she was approached by 2 women at a Havelock North park. She was told to cover her chin because her mokokauai was scaring children. Glenys Philip Barbara says Ms Scott's response is incredible.
Not only to compose herself in the moment, because when you've been directly insulted, it's difficult to do so, but then to extend her wish to meet with these women and to offer to educate them so that they might cease to operate with such ignorance.
Glenys Philip Barbara says the Havelock North community has work to do to combat racism. In sport, Olympians Lewis Clareburt and Erica Fairweather and Paris swimmer star Dame Sophie Pascoe head a 12-strong New Zealand squad to compete at the Commonwealth Games in July. The team is made up of 8 able-bodied and 4 para-athletes. The programs will run side by side in Birmingham. For Dame Sophie, who recently split with long-time coach Rolly Crichton, it'll be her 3rd Games, but without new coach Brett Naylor.
I think that shows, the maturity and the extent of how long I have been swimming, that I can actually take control of myself and that everything is on me. And I know that Brett will be back here, supporting me anyway.
Dame Sophie's only race of the Games, the 100-metre freestyle S9, is on the opening day of competition. Former New Zealand women's rugby sevens coach Alan Bunting will overhaul the culture of the Black Ferns 15s side. He's been appointed to the newly created role of Manager of Culture and Leadership, established following a review that highlighted the need to strengthen the team environment. Meanwhile, the Hurricanes have sold a 25% stake in the Super Rugby franchise to a Hong Kong-based sports marketing firm. Y11 Sport and Media own Welsh rugby club, the Ospreys. And in football, Manchester City have beaten Real Madrid 4-3 in the first leg of their Champions League semi-final. That's the news.
Labor wants to know how much tax the wealthiest are paying.
We've really got no idea, and therefore people can't assess whether middle-income earners in New Zealand are paying a higher rate of tax than the wealthy.
But Chris Luxon isn't so sure.
Those powers exist today, and that is between an individual and the IRD.
So you're saying that David Parker is being disingenuous?
I have no idea what David Parker's trying to do.
Nothing is as certain as death and taxes, and Morning Report weekdays from 6am on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Nick Trubridge, who's standing in for Lisa Owen. Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland, cloudy periods with the odd shower this evening. Showers more frequent and heavier for a time tomorrow. For Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, fine spells increasing this afternoon. Isolated showers are possible in the east overnight tonight. From Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine but a few cloudy periods. The odd shower in Wellington today. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, a few showers becoming isolated tomorrow. For Te Waipoinamu, Nelson and Marlborough, fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, fine today. Areas of cloud tomorrow with a few showers about northern Westland and Bulla. For Canterbury, cloud is increasing and patchy drizzle about the foothills for a time today. It's fine tomorrow. Otago and Southland, showers are retreating to the coast today and then it's clearing tomorrow. And for Diakohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few light showers. The time is 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Thanks, Evie. Kia ora, good evening. This is Checkpoint. I'm Nick Trubridge. Not demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society, grounded Kiwis has won its High Court challenge against the Minister of Health after claiming the MIQ lottery system failed New Zealanders living overseas by refusing them the right to return home freely. In a 140-page judgment released this afternoon, Justice Mallon said the MIQ lobby did not allow personal circumstances to be considered or prioritised. She said whilst the system, which operated for 22 months from April 2020, was a critical component of the government's elimination strategy and had positive health outcomes, the virtual lobby and narrow emergency criteria meant the rights of Kiwis to return freely was infringed. Now, Martin Newell is spokesperson for the grounded Kiwis and joins me now. Good evening, Martin.
Good evening, Nick.
A big day for you, more importantly, a big day for thousands of New Zealanders, Martin. How do you feel?
We're really thrilled with the decision. You know, we recognise it's an emotional day for many of our members, but you know, we knew that morally there was a wrong, and this has now been legally recognised by the court that the government did not act consistently with their legal obligations.
Yeah, and you speak about those legal obligations. One of the biggest finding relates to this virtual lobby, right? People lumped in together, no matter what their circumstance. What fundamentally, from grounded Kiwis' point of view, was the issue with that?
Well, it didn't really recognise how long you may have been waiting to come home. You know, we're probably all familiar with queuing, whether it's queuing to go through airport security or queuing to go to a restaurant. If someone walked up to the front of that queue that you've been in for an hour or so, you would probably feel rightly unjustified. And you know, what the government failed to do through operating the MIQ system and particularly the lobby system was to prioritise that need.
Yeah, absolutely. And what next? I mean, are we talking compensation? Are you after, I don't know, an apology, an official recognition from the government here, Martin?
Yeah, so what we've sought in this particular case, or what we can seek in this particular case, is what they call declaratory relief. So, you know, both parties need to make submissions, and you know, what we would hope is that the government will make a statement that it could have done better to give effect to the rights of New Zealand citizens to return. You know, if the government chooses proactively, it's up to them to decide whether it takes compensation for people for their suffering, or whether individuals want to take a case up against the government for, you know, suffering and trauma that they may have experienced as a result of these impingements on their right to return.
Yeah, absolutely. What about, I mean, you're obviously part of this group. What is your particular route? What will you be doing next personally? Will you be seeking anything further?
Look, not for me personally. You know, many of the dozens of volunteers that, you know, are part of Grounded Kiwis and became involved through a variety of personal circumstances, and it was, you know, always driven by this recognition that there was a moral wrong here, that we felt that there was an inadequate way for Kiwis to be able to come home. You know, this case was never about challenging the legality of MIQ itself. We recognised that MIQ was a tool that supported New Zealand's elimination strategy, which we also never challenged. It was about creating a system that was fair and enabled people to come home if they needed to. And that's what the judge has recognised in her decision today. And the government could have taken very simple steps to be able to understand that need. You know, Justice Mellon recognises, and I quote from her judgment, that there appears to have been no proper system to gather information from overseas New Zealanders about this. It was inevitable that the system would operate unjustly in some individual cases because of this. You know, if it simply, you know, sought to kind of understand who was trying to come home, where they're coming from, and how long they've been waiting, it could have come up with a fairer system.
Yeah, and there will be people at home listening to this, Martin, who will be saying, they'll be listening to what you say, and they'll be saying, look, at the end of the day, the system was robust enough in that it kept us all healthy and safe. What do you say to those people? There will be thousands of those people with that view listening to this.
100%. You know, they won't be feeling like some of us, which feel like we're just, you know, David taking on Goliath. But what I would say is that, you know, when this pandemic is over, or perhaps even before this pandemic is over, we don't know when the end will come. At some point, we need to sit down and look at what's gone well, and, you know, evidently, you know, New Zealand has done exceptionally well at keeping deaths down as a measure in the OECD, but what could we have also done better? And the judge points to the fact that there are simple changes to the way the MIQ system could have been operated that would have made it fairer, but would have not altered those the government's public health aims and that initial result. And I think whether it's a Royal Commission of Inquiry or some sort of independent inquiry, we need to sit down and look at the entire response and how we can do it better, because this will not be the last pandemic. And we need to be prepared for when the next one comes. And do it as well as we possibly can and learn those lessons, so that we don't put overseas and Kiwis that need to go overseas through this trauma again.
Thank you, Martin. That's Martin Newell there. He is spokesperson for the grounded Kiwis, of course. We asked the COVID-19 Minister, Chris Hipkins, for an interview on this. He didn't front for the show tonight. Obviously, he's not here, but he did send us this. MIQ was always the least worst option to help keep COVID-19 from entering and spreading in New Zealand, rather. And the High Court concluded that other options would not sufficiently have achieved the public health objectives the government had legitimately determined to pursue. The court has noted the considerable work carried out and significant funds invested in the MIQ system, and that the health risks of making the wrong decision were very significant. The minister says the government has long acknowledged the difficult trade-offs it's had to make in its COVID-19 response to save lives, and the effects of those decisions on all New Zealanders, particularly those living abroad. And finally, Minister Hipkins says it was particularly challenging for those applying for MIQ places between September and December last year. He says the government acknowledges that the court has found for some citizens the virtual lobby, as it operated during that time, may have infringed on people's rights to enter New Zealand. The COVID-19 Minister, Chris Hipkins, there. Look, we'd love your feedback on that. Text me, Patuhi Mai 2101, tweet us on @checkpointrnz, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Right, to Littleton Port now. On the eve of International Workers' Memorial Day, the government's announced there will be an investigation into two fatalities at our ports, rather. Pressure was mounting after a man was killed at Littleton Port on Monday and another died at the ports of Auckland last week. Port companies are also being asked to review their operations, and there could be regulatory changes. Craig Harrison is the National Secretary for the Maritime Union of New Zealand and joins me now from Littleton Port. Good evening, Craig.
Hello, how you going?
Yeah, good. Look, what do you think about all this? It's been a long time coming. Interestingly, after the two most recent deaths, everyone will know we've had a raft of deaths over the years. But what do you think of, I suppose, the review that's been announced here?
I think what the Minister announced today is a pragmatic approach to looking at what we've got as a significant issue in our industry, having them start the investigations on what's caused it, but also noting that he's in the next 2 weeks, Maritime New Zealand and WorkSafe will do a thorough review of the port companies in New Zealand, but also requiring anyone in the industry to comply with that request to, be part of that process. So our union welcomes it. Also, we note that the leadership shown, for instance, like the ports of Auckland now and the Port of Littleton, of involving the union and workers in the process is really important. And we note, like you said, tomorrow's Workers' Memorial Day, and it's a day we remember workers that haven't gone home from work, and, we look at our industry and that shouldn't happen. So the announcement today is welcomed, and I think it's the quickest way to find lasting results.
Yeah, and of course it's on the back of two deaths, two of the most recent deaths, but if you look through the numbers, there have been, I believe it's about 6 deaths in 6 years. A pretty terrible record. So what are some of the practices that you are seeing occur at our ports today that concern you the most?
Well, I think to my experience, fundamentally comes down to them not ascertaining or, managing the risk. It comes down to, what is their risk management? And it could be not having the right amount of people on the job or the right equipment. But note in the last couple of years, especially in the last 18 months with the freight volumes up, and there's been a real pressure to get this cargo on and off the ships and out of our ports. So we've got to acknowledge that, the ports haven't got any bigger than they are now, and the industry's been stressed for a couple of years. So we should really take these deaths and also there's a lot of people going off injured, haven't come back to work either. But we should reflect on where we are, and we're a terrible record when we look at the global supply chain.
And so what's got to come out of this, Craig? Because we have seen, internal reviews before. Certainly we've seen them at ports of Auckland. What measurable outcomes do you want to see come out of this? We see these reviews all the time. What do you actually want to see change?
We'd like to see some enforceable codes of practice that can be enforced under law. I look to the stuff, the work that's been done in Australia, for instance, or Canada around port safety. There's significant gains being made over there. And you've only got to look to Australia as our nearest neighbour. The size of their industry, their port industry, and compared to New Zealand, I've heard, in the last 5 years, I've heard no deaths. So you can imagine the freight tasks that they have, for instance, in Sydney alone. Yet they seem to manage it well, and what they have is a robust code of practice that's enforceable, so there can be no race to the bottom. If you can't comply with that code, you can't go onto the port to work.
You're, of course, joining us from Littleton, where one of those two most recent deaths occurred. What have the workers there said to you? What are their concerns?
I haven't had much engagement with the workers. I just came down here today, but the workers it's a solemn place, and until you had the investigation completed and find what's happened in this instance, it's like all workers. They're reflecting on the loss of a colleague, a workmate, a long-term friend, and their thoughts are with the family, because the impacts last forever after these incidents.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Craig. That's Craig Harrison, who is National Secretary from the Maritime Union of New Zealand. It is 20 minutes past 5. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Nick Trubridge in for Lisa Owen. Right, between 15 and 20 ram raids are said to be happening in the country each week across the country. That's according to the Dairy and Business Owners Group, which is demanding more action. Last night saw at least 3 more stores targeted in Auckland, including in Titirangi and Mairangi Bay. 3 cars hurtled into Ormiston town centre the night before, and a group of men used a weapon to smash inside West City Mall. The apparent surge in violent shop crime has seen retailers resorting to private security and self-defence lessons, and they fear authorities won't crack down until someone is killed. Katie Todd has the story.
Seda Dadabai's run Wellington Street superette in Freeman's Bay in Auckland for 33 years. Her shop had never been ram raided, and she counted herself lucky. That all ended when a car came ploughing into the shop in February while she slept on the second story. Offenders fled with cigarettes and haven't been caught. It was almost, she says, inevitable.
All our friends and people that we know who have dairies all have been ram raided. I don't know, it makes you angry because you work hard 7 days.
The store's still boarded up, and Seda Dadabai is worried that ram raids are now happening so frequently she'll be struck again. Her business is on a growing list of those hit by smash and grabs in recent weeks. There's also Ormiston Town Centre, Louis Vuitton and Gucci, and dozens of other convenience stores, including 2 more last night. But it's not just Auckland. Dairy and Business Owners Group Chair Sunny Koshal says the group's members have been reporting 15 to 20 ram raids each week nationwide. The police haven't been able to provide RNZ with their own data on the number of ram raids. Mr Koshal feels there's a sense of lawlessness gripping the country.
2 years ago, the ram raids were very, very lesser numbers. The modus operandi during that time was the assaults and aggravated robberies. But now this is the new found modus operandi of these offenders, where most of the young offenders are involved in these crimes, and they are taking it as a fun.
He says dairy owners shouldn't have to fork out for private security or self-defence lessons, as some are doing.
We need our crimes to be taken seriously, as our blood is on the hands of these politicians. My very real concern is that sooner or later somebody will be killed.
Those words echoed in the Bay of Plenty town of Kawerau by this man, whose butchery was rammed and then set on fire in October.
The sad part about it, somebody's going to get hurt, and that's when I guess the powers to be will actually get off their chuffs and actually do something.
He's not just any business owner, it's Malcolm Campbell, the district's mayor. He says there's been a 12-month spate of ram raids and he's frustrated with seemingly lax laws.
These people have got to be brought to justice, and a slap on the back of the wrist with a wet bus ticket is not the answer. It's no good telling us or telling everybody else that jail is not the answer. Well, what is the answer then? I have to ask the same people that are saying, well, they don't have the answer. But some of these politicians need to have it happen to them, and they might change their ways.
To catch the offenders, Seda Dadabai says she'd like the police to look at where the stolen goods are going.
And it's young kids that do it, and they get away. And then the worst thing is, what I feel personally is, somebody is buying these things. You've got to go to that end. There's a black market for these items.
Sunny Koshal is calling for lawmakers and authorities to show some steel. He says until then, offenders will keep making a mockery of them.
Our reporter Katie Todd joins us now. Katie, police have just held that media conference about these ram raids. What have they said?
Kia ora. Well, Detective Inspector Karen Bright fronted media at the MIQ police station, and she spoke about ram raids on three main points. She wanted it known that police are aware of a spike in these kinds of incidents, they're concerned about it, and they're doing what they can to address it. The exact extent of the increase they've seen in ram raids remains a bit of a mystery. There were no concrete statistics except that 60 young offenders have been caught in Counties Manukau for ram raiding since October. But the police say it has increased, and it's not just in Auckland, it's right across the country. They say that's having an impact on retail, and it's a concern. They're really worried that the majority of offenders are really young. Some of them stealing cars and ploughing into shops are just 11 years old. And Karen Bright says that's a tragedy just waiting to happen. But she says it will also take more than just the police to get these young offenders out off the streets in the middle of the night and doing something productive.
So what are police doing to get on top of this, Katie? We know in central Auckland, for example, calls for greater patrols, police being more visible. Have they made any commitments in terms of how they're going to deal with this?
Well, Karen Bright says the police have increased patrols. She gave that confirmation. She says they're also working with partner agencies to try and deal with these young offenders. They're working with retailers to make shops safer and car owners to help discourage theft. Interestingly, they're also working with social media companies. We know some of these offenders have boasted about their exploits on TikTok, for example, and the police say the social media companies they've engaged with have been cooperative. No specifics on that one, unfortunately. Karen Bright gave her assurances that the police aren't lacking in resources to deal with these ram raids.
Thanks, Katie. That's Katie Todd there from that police press conference that's just been held on those ram raids. Right, the story in the store that you've all been waiting for, and what many Kiwis hope will be a strong challenge to the supermarket duopoly. American giant discount retailer Costco has begun trading in Auckland today, with construction of its store still underway. They opened a petrol station this morning and motorists were keen to sign up for the discounted fuel. I bet they were. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Kabazi have the story.
Queues already forming at Costco's new fuel station in Auckland's Westgate. At $2.49 for unleaded 91, those filling up say it's a deal they didn't want to miss.
Very excited because we live not far from here and we wanted to be the first one to use.
I know Costco when I was in USA, so I plan to be a membership here. So, and the fuel price is cheaper than I say Pack and Save.
Anything for cheaper petrol, why not? Yeah, so it's pretty good. We've got some competition coming in the country, and hopefully Costco will make a big difference to all the petrol companies around New Zealand.
To be honest, I'm sick and tired of the duopoly, so yeah, just wanted to support them in their first day, and yeah, I mean the fuel is cheaper, so why not?
But it's not just about fuel. Their $100 million store is due to open in a few months. The petrol station and store can only be used by Costco members, with an annual membership fee of $60 for individuals and $55 for businesses.
So this is the main retail floor, so this effectively will have racks, and in the racks will be all the goods stored, and then in the middle here will be goods sitting on pallets, and this will be the fast-moving sort of consumables that people want quickly. And then behind us is the bakery and meat prep stores.
Kim Barrett is the managing director of the company that's been building the site for the last 2 years. It's been no small feat.
So there is 3 hectares of car parking above the retail floor, and there's 1.4 hectares of retail floor. Typically they'll have a site that's 7 hectares, we've only got 3 hectares, so we've had to make it up by putting cars on the roof.
1,800 concrete columns have been used as part of the construction. Workers are busy putting together shelves and the bones of the store. Despite COVID interruptions, Kim's confident the team will meet the August deadline for the store to open its doors.
There'll be easily between 150 and 200 people through the period, and we constantly monitor it, and that's why we knew when Omicron was going through the workforce, we dropped to less than 50% people here, but we're back to full strength now and ready for the run to the finish.
Managing Director Patrick Noon explains what makes up the $24 million worth of goods that'll be on shelves.
We like to carry everything except for firearms and live animals, so everything in between. So, for example, you walk in here, you see TVs and jewellery, high-end diamonds, housewares, small appliances, large appliances for kitchens, apparel, highly seasonal merchandise like patio, then Christmas decks and things like that. And then basic food supplies, and of course fresh food is one of the bigger areas of the business as well.
But one thing will be missing, there'll be no alcohol for sale.
Yeah, this area is a trust area, so all the alcohol has to be sold through the local trust. We did have some discussions early on about how we could see whether that could work in the Costco. I think we arrived at the conclusion we could probably do something in the future, but right now I think it became complicated. The focus was on getting the warehouse open.
There are also plans for a pharmacy, optometrist and tyre service here at Costco, with many jobs being advertised to fill those roles. Despite inflation reaching an all-time high, Patrick Noon's confident they can provide the best price.
We already have an existing supply chain in Australia and around the world. So I believe looking at what we can do and looking at the local market, I'm very confident we'll bring goods to market at a really competitive price.
And there's a clear message for the competition.
They run their own business and we run ours. Obviously we're successful globally. We'll offer a product to the New Zealand consumer that's not available now. So we're pretty confident we compete with anyone.
Greg Harford from Retail New Zealand says it may take longer than they think in the New Zealand market.
I think anyone entering into the market is always going to have some challenges putting together their suppliers and their supply chain.
But with the cost of living soaring, he's welcoming some competitive pressure that can help drive prices down elsewhere.
It's certainly going to put competitive pressure into the market, and I think you'll see other retailers look to respond to that.
If the first store in Auckland is successful, Costco's looking to open other stores in Christchurch or Wellington. Memberships opened last month and the company says a few thousand have signed up so far, with 4 months to go before the main store opens its doors.
Can't wait. If you want to look at that story from Louise and Marika, it'll be available on our website. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Nick Trubridge in for Lisa Owen. Haidiaki nei coming up, the tale of Burma the elephant, due to cross the ditch until she wasn't. We'll speak to Auckland Zoo's boss. Dunedin's main drag is getting a facelift. It's getting a facelift, the main drag. We hit the street to check it out, and gone. A bumper art collection is going under the hammer, all for a good cause. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101 and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint on Facebook, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now it's time for the headlines with Evie.
The High Court has ruled that it was inevitable the managed isolation and quarantine lottery system would operate unjustly. The lobby group Grounded Kiwis has won its case, which argued that the room release lottery was unlawful and in breach of the Bill of Rights. The government says it's examining the ruling. The police are concerned that children as young as 11 are taking part in ram raids. In one raid this week, 3 stolen cars were driven into an Auckland mall, crashing into shops. CCTV footage shows a large group of young people running beside the vehicles. Detective Inspector Karen Bright says while ram raids aren't a new issue, there's been a spike in recent times. She says they're a tragedy waiting to happen. An independent inquiry into port accidents at Lyttelton and Auckland will focus on avoiding similar incidents in the future. It's being carried out by the Transport Accident Investigation Commission and will look into the deaths of 2 workers in the space of a week. A team of investigators will be at Lyttelton tomorrow and will talk to workers, gather evidence and secure records, including photos and videos. The group representing insurance companies says climate change doesn't necessarily mean some people will be denied cover. The government's seeking feedback on a 6-year plan to prepare for the impact of flooding, wildfires, droughts and a rise in sea levels. It includes legislation to relocate people who live in extremely exposed areas. The Insurance Council's Chief Executive, Tim Grafton, says insurance is still available everywhere in New Zealand and that doesn't have to change. And a Malaysian man found guilty of drug trafficking a decade ago in Singapore has been executed. Nagentran Dharmalingam had been assessed as having the mental age of a child. A legal challenge by his mother was rejected. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thank you, Evie. Time for business news now, and Nona Peltier joins me in the studio. Nona, first off, the Electricity Authority's final report on last winter's major power outage was released today. What did it find?
It was actually it was consistent with what they had found in their preliminary report, which was that Transpower was responsible for the outage in that it didn't communicate well. There was a lack of coordination. And so as a result of that, 34,000 consumers were left without power on the coldest night of the year. I'm sure that will be remembered by many, specifically probably in Waikato, where 17,000 homes were affected. What the authority has also come out with is some lessons learned, how they're going to tackle things in the future. It's not the end of the process. There's going to be a complaint was made by the authority to the ruling panel, which is now going to examine whether or not there should be some perhaps penalties levied at Transpower. The other thing is during the course of the investigation, the authority went back through reports of other types of similar sorts of events where many of the same sort of recommendations were made, but not followed up. So I spoke earlier today with the chief executive of the authority, James Stevenson Wallace, and what he wanted to say was really there weren't just lessons for the industry, there were also lessons for the authority itself.
And I guess from the authority's perspective, we could have done a better job of monitoring progress to improve communications and protocols. And we're committing to more regular and frequent engagement with Transpower to make sure that the recommendations from all these reviews are progressed and addressed so that consumers can continue to have confidence in New Zealand's electricity system.
And that's the authority chief executive, James Stevenson Wallace there. So we haven't heard the end of this. There's more to come.
Yeah, and to Auckland Central City, Nona, it's quiet at the moment. It's about to get a lot quieter. Air New Zealand relocating its office to Auckland Airport, away from the central city. What can you tell us about that?
Well, they are actually in the process of building a new hangar, and that's going to provide more than enough room for the airline to expand on its new business model, which is more collaboration, more working together, and cutting costs where they can. And so their lease on their Fanshawe Street head office, it will come up for renewal, I think, in 2027. But they're looking to move in 2024, and they're going to look to sublet their space. Good luck with that, with a lot of office buildings trying the same old thing. The city centre is certainly not going to benefit from this decision, and no doubt Well, let's hope that somebody comes along and fills that space. Let's hope for that.
Absolutely. Fly us round the markets.
Okay, well, the top 50 index, it had a pretty rough day. At one point, it hit an intraday low that we haven't seen since October 2020, and that's in line with what we've been seeing globally. So we ended up not too bad. We fell 0.7%. That's still not great. An 87-point drop to 11,726. The New Zealand dollar also took quite a battering overnight, and it's been steady through the day, but really we're at 65.7 US cents. And that's really a story about the big dollar in the United States, where people are really worried about the Federal Reserve hiking interest rates there. 9 91.6 Australian and 52.2 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier from our business team there. Thank you, Nona. Right, to some of your feedback now. And look, fair to say it is flooding in. Well, who would have thought on this MIQ issue? It always gets people hot under the collar. First of all, an unsurprising win for the privileged and entitled, this listener says. Hardly surprising seeing the judiciary belong to the crowd. Look how many people have died. They brought it here by their selfish behaviour. Scathing. Minister Hipkins, someone not happy with him. A pathetic response from Minister Hipkins. How about an apology and a promise to do better? I resigned from the Labour Party membership, this person says, over this issue at the border. I did not have anyone overseas myself, but I did see the tremendous suffering of others. It was simply not natural justice. Well done, this person says. And finally, 100% happy with MIQ as it stood, this person says. That's what kept us safe and put us in the remarkable position that we're now in. Unsurprisingly, a flood of feedback on that. Keep it coming. You can text us 2101. Right, now for some, a story on Auckland Zoo, which has been a real saga. A team from Auckland Zoo visited Australia Zoo just over 3 weeks ago to pave the way for the relocation of Burma, only for Australia Zoo to pull the pin in an email on Easter Monday. The 38-year-old elephant was due to cross the ditch next week to retire with a herd on the Sunshine Coast, but Zoo Director Kevin Bewley told me he's shocked and gutted the deal, which was 12 months in the making, has now fallen over.
I guess it was about a year ago, almost exactly, we finalised the agreement with Australia Zoo to send Burma to join their herd on the Sunshine Coast, and that has been in place for about 12 months. Detailing, what we would do for them, what they would need to do for us, and the kind of staffing support we would provide for them. Everything was in place and ready to go. 3 weeks ago, I travelled across to Sunshine Coast with the team leader of elephants, and we met with the team over there, and everything seemed to be fine. So as far as we were concerned, everything was on track as far as was possible. So it was a bit of a shock for us when I got the email on the Easter Monday morning.
12 months of prep's gone into this, so what's the financial cost?
Well, so aside from the countless staff hours that have gone into preparing this move, everything else at the moment is currently recoverable or transferable. So when we do find a new home for Burma, we'll be able to reuse those funds or transfer those funds.
What reason did Australia Zoo give, Kevin?
So the reason we've had, and the reason that you would have seen in the media, is around health concerns with one of their animals, a bacterial infection. Beyond that, I don't have any more details.
Had Australia Zoo raised these health concerns earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. It was something that we were fully familiar with, that there'd been extensive discussions between our vets and their vets around it. Obviously, with a health concern at their end, it was we had to be fully comfortable that there was no risk for Burma going there. And given the circumstances described to us, given the situation, our vets decided with the team here that there was negligible risk for Burma.
So up until the 11th hour, these health concerns with the animal overseas were well known, but the 11th hour, basically Australia Zoo ended up using them as a reason why they couldn't take Burma on.
So I can't speak for Australia Zoo, and I'm not prepared to speak for Australia Zoo today, obviously. And that's something that you can take up with them. But as far as we're concerned, yes, that was the reason it was given to us.
So can Australia Zoo still take Burma down the track?
All the indications are to us that they've cancelled the plans, that there's not an offer there for the future to accommodate her. And to be honest, if they're in a situation where they're not comfortable to take her, they don't want to take her, then it's not the best place for her. We want Burma to go to a home where she's wanted and where we know that she's going to be able to live out the rest of her years.
Were they paying to take Burma or vice versa? Were you paying to move her, or are there costs shared?
There's costs for both organisations, which on our side, as I said before, are recoverable or transferable.
Okay, so as for I suppose, the situation we find ourselves in now, Burma is getting a little bit older, heading towards retirement, well, in retirement, you could say. What now? I know Anjali's at Taronga Zoo. Could she go there? Might she stay in Auckland?
Well, you mentioned Anjali. That has been a successful part of what we've done so far. Is when we made a decision to end the program here 2 years ago, it was with Anjali's long-term well-being in mind, that she needed to be part of the breeding herd, and we'd exhausted all possibilities to breed her here at Auckland. And so that's why the very difficult decision was made at the time to send her to Dubbo. She settled in fantastically well. For those that don't know, she moved across there last month. She's now fully integrated with the herd, has a new best friend in a 3-year-old calf there, and by all reports has done really well. So that's fantastic news for us, fantastic news for the team that she's in that situation. We thought we had it all sorted with Burma, with her move to her retirement home on the Sunshine Coast. That obviously has fallen over. It does mean that she's on her own here now, which wasn't the plan, but she's doing really, really well, and that's reassuring. Very quickly after Anjali left, and I think it's part of it is the princess in her, as we like to say, that she's now the sole focus of attention for the keepers. So she's enjoying all that attention that was previously shared between two elephants. But that's not what we need for her in the long term. In the long term, she needs to be with other animals. She spent an extended period of time on her own before Anjali came to us from Sri Lanka from 2009 to 2015. And she did remarkably well during that time, but that's not what we want for her in the long term. In the long term, she needs to be with other female elephants.
She needs to be socialised, yeah. Can I just ask, you're zoo director, obviously. This thing was all ready to go. You'd done the backing into the container. She'd been through all her practice. What was your reaction when this withdrawal came across your desk?
It's crushing disappointment and frustration, not just for Burma, but for the team, the elephant team, who have put so much of their lives into this program, and particularly since the decision was made to end the program here, getting Burma and Anjali ready for the move, putting their own lives on hold, working ridiculous hours, coming in at all times of the day and night to look after the animals. They have gone above and beyond at every stage, and all of this through a pandemic. They were prepared to move across with Burma, settle her in for an extended period of time. So again, we're putting their lives on hold, spending extended periods of time away from family and friends. They literally had their bags packed and ready to go. And I am so proud of how they have dealt with this over the last 2 years, and I am completely gutted for them now.
Auckland Zoo Director Kevin Bewley there. Well, the traffic cones are out and barriers are up in Dunedin's retail quarter undergoes a facelift. The George Street revamp was prompted by the need to replace old water, wastewater and stormwater pipes, some dating back to the late 1800s. It's been more than 3 decades since the last upgrade, and the council has earmarked more than $28 million to make the area more people-friendly with new paving, street furniture, lighting and public art. Reporter Tess Brunton visited business owners near the construction zone to find out if they think the revamp is totally gorgeous or misses the mark.
Walking down George Street, the latest construction zone is concentrated on the city block between Moray Place and St Andrew Street, a short stroll from the Octagon. It's down to one lane for southbound traffic, but it remains open for business to shoppers and pedestrians. Helen Ransby from Trade Aid is excited to see George Street get a revamp.
Parts of the street where they'd taken out some rubbish bins were the whole area around there was quite dirty. There's nowhere to sit, there's no trees. It's functional.
She isn't sure what impact the construction will have on business.
I mean, maybe it won't. Maybe people will be a bit more interested and come down here and have a look at what's going on, even though it's just construction work. It's something different happening in the city. It's just hard to tell.
A few shops down the road is Brent Weatherall Jeweller. It has a sign out the front banning the local mayor from entry. Weatherall petitioned against a one-way street design for George Street. Council says will offer more space for other uses and improve road safety. He says shop owners have been happy with the traffic flow since the horse and cart days.
The ripple effect will basically gridlock the centre of Dunedin and make the choice to shop in an area frequently, conveniently, effortlessly will be severely impacted.
But he isn't against the upgrade itself, saying the timing works well.
Well, we are going into tumbleweed season, as I call it, and I really think that they're not removing access to any of the stores, and they're going to do the level best to maintain it. It may not be as convenient as what it was, but I'd rather my block be developed in the middle of winter and tumbleweed season than in the middle of the festive season.
Across the street, barriers are more of a feature, with signs saying the footpath is closed and customer and business access only. A few metres away is Jonathan's photo warehouse. Group manager Jonathan Kemp expects there will be some short-term pain for hopefully long-term gain.
What effect it will have on us as a business, we'll have to wait and see. So it's early stages, but the contractors and the council have taken a lot of care and thought and making sure that we can operate and provide our services.
Tennealle Anderton opened the bakehouse on Bond, the George Street site, about 7 months ago. She's pleased with how accommodating the team in charge have been, saying business is ticking away.
I think it's going to look really good. I like the idea of all the seating and things around. I think that'll help and bring people to town. I feel like there is a bit of a downfall with the parking and with it being a one-way system. But overall, I think the outlook of the designs that I've seen, it looks really nice.
The Dunedin City Council acknowledges construction work is disruptive. It's opened a project office so businesses and residents can meet with staff to resolve any issues, has tweaked on-street parking to offset any losses, and is encouraging shoppers to visit. While work on the city block is expected to wrap up in October, the full revamp isn't predicted to be ready until 2024.
Weird and wonderful species are washing up on South Island beaches, worrying locals. Visitors to Aramoana Beach got a shock after finding a serpent-like oarfish floating in the shallows. Ray's bream have been found far from home on the shores of Otago Peninsula, and 14 hectares dolphins have been found dead around the South Island since November. Ray Smith is a physical oceanographer and lecturer at Rob Smith, apologies Rob, is a physical oceanographer and lecturer at University of Otago, and he joins me now. Good evening, Rob.
Hey, how are you doing?
Yeah, really well. Look, can we start on these hectares dolphins? 14, they're not in large supply of these things, as we know. 14 in recent times have washed up. What is behind that?
Yeah, I'm not too sure about the hectares dolphins. It's a really interesting question, but certainly, as you mentioned a moment ago, these raised bream and also those other fish that have washed up has been really quite unusual around the Otago Peninsula recently.
Yeah, absolutely. And as for these other fish, I mean, the average, you just have to look at them, don't you? The average person could find them a little bit alarming, let's say. Is it surprising that these are being found sort of so far away from, where they usually would be?
Yeah, it is really quite unusual. So we suspect that these unusual occurrences are associated with a strong marine heatwave that is occurring around parts of the South Island of New Zealand at present. So a marine heatwave is an extended period of extremely warm ocean temperatures at a particular location. And these events can last several months and extend over several thousand square kilometres. Now, interestingly, the waters of the west and south coasts of the South Island of New Zealand has been in a strong to severe marine heatwave since mid-February. And this has seen ocean temperatures reaching 3 to 5 degrees Celsius above normal for more than 1,000 kilometres of coastline. Now, what's really quite interesting is that these previous marine heat waves elsewhere in the world have caused substantial shifts in the abundance and also the distribution of both recreational and commercial fish stocks. And that's a consequence of the unusually warm water temperatures enabling particular species of fish or the prey that they're chasing to move into regions that ordinarily are too cold for them, or to escape from areas that become too warm for those species or for their prey.
Yeah, because this is it's really been a South Island phenomenon, hasn't it? Where, of course, the water is a lot cooler. So why localise to the South Island, and particularly, Otago Peninsula, so the eastern side?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this particular marine heatwave appears to have been triggered by an unusual combination of coastal winds and the flow of heat from ocean currents in the Tasman Sea. Now, those conditions have been largely confined to the west coast of the South Island, Stewart Island and the Otago Peninsula. So this may help explain why these reports of unusual fish appearing or washing up has focused around the South Island rather than the North Island.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, back to these dolphins, because this is, it's really quite sad, really. There aren't many of these around. 14 in recent times. Have you seen this sort of, for want of a better phrase, death rate when it comes to Hector's dolphins?
The Hector's dolphins, I'm afraid, is a little bit too far outside of my experience, so it's a bit tricky to speak to those. But, we've certainly seen some particularly interesting and unusual anecdotal reports from around Fiordland and also throughout Southland and the Otago Peninsula, and beyond those which you just mentioned. So there's been some charter operators in Dusky Sound and also some recreational fishers who have mentioned there have been unreal amounts of tuna and kingfish in the fjords. There's also been sightings of sunfish and sperm whales, which apparently are unheard of for those particular areas.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Hey, look, thanks, Rob. That is Rob Smith. He's a physical oceanologist from Otago University. Right, Stewart Island operators have told the Southland District Council a tripling of the visitor level will scare off tourists. The council's been hearing from submitters on the proposal to increase the visitor levy from $5 to $15 from October next year. Rachel Graham has more.
The council received 102 submissions on the plan to up the visitor levy, with just over half of them wanting it increased from the current $5. But only 18% of submitters want the levy increased all the way to $15 for each adult visitor. Stewart Island local Alistair Faulkner is one of those. He says tourism is creating extra costs for locals, many of whom don't get any benefit from the visitors.
Basically, 400 people living on the island don't do the damage to the road, don't require the power upgrades, don't require the sewage upgrades that are required by the visitors that are coming over here. So I would suspect that $15 would be the minimum that it should be raised to.
Another local, Margaret Hopkins, was comfortable with an increase to $10, but says anything higher might put people off visiting. She says the council also needs to avoid the temptation to dream up new projects just to spend the money gathered.
I did look and see recently where there were plans to build a new track in Baker Park on Stewart Island. Well, I think that's just an example of stupidity. That's dreaming up a project that's both unnecessary and expensive and commits the council to long-term expenditure trying to maintain it. And heaven knows we've got enough tracks on Stewart Island already.
Aaron Joy is the chair of Stewart Island Promotions and runs Stewart Island Backpackers, the island's biggest accommodation provider. He's also concerned about how the money would be spent and says it shouldn't just make up for years of council underinvestment.
I get concerned that, all our jetties need work on, so it's clearly an asset management problem that hasn't been really addressed properly over the years. So now there's this catch-up happening, and suddenly it looks like, okay, the easy way to get some money for the island is increase the levy.
Mr Joy says he could accept the levy increasing to $10, but says $15 would start putting visitors off. Bill Moffat from Stewart Island Flights was among the almost a third of submitters who don't want to see any increase in the levy. Mr Moffat was sceptical about information in the council report, saying an increase in the price won't put people off.
Every time you increase the price, that turns people off. Even if 1,000 to 2,000 potential visitors decide against visiting Stewart Island due to the cost, that equates to around $500,000 to $1 million of lost revenue for the island itself, but the businesses on the island, which I don't think is good.
The council is now considering all submissions and will make a decision at the next full council meeting on May 11.
Right, time for some of your feedback now. Let's go back to our lead story, of course, on MIQ. One listener writes, demanded the right to return. The constant criticism by the government's critics is ridiculous. Thousands of lives were saved. A pretty strong opinion there. Another one on the other side of the fence. I'm pleased to see our citizens who are unjustly locked out finally getting some recognition. It should never have happened the way it did. And for some people, they will suffer lifelong trauma due to not having access to their family. Right, let's go to the issue of ram raids as well. Stolen cars seem to be the weapon of choice in ram raids. Car owners need to take more responsibility to secure their cars. Thank you, Rosie in Hastings, for that bit of feedback. Look, you can still get on touch with us. There is still another half an hour to go. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz.co.nz.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. A major challenge to the government's COVID response has succeeded in the High Court. Justice Mellon has ruled the MIQ system operated unfairly by not sufficiently allowing for the individual circumstances of New Zealanders trying to get home. Waikato University law professor Al Gillespie says the judge has recognised MIQ was justified but was applied too indiscriminately.
The way it was applied was too blunt. And so there were some Kiwis who have more pressing priorities and different needs to other people, and these could not be taken into account, and the government could not explain why they were not taken into account.
A spokesperson for the Grounded Kiwis lobby group, which mounted the legal challenge to MIQ, says it's thrilled with the court's decision. Martin Newell told Checkpoint the case was never about challenging the legality of MIQ itself, but about enabling people to come home if they needed to. He says he wants to see an inquiry into the government's pandemic response so that lessons can be learned from it. Al Gillespie says the ruling could open the door for a test case brought by an individual. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission is to investigate the deaths of 2 workers at the country's ports in the space of a week. It's also being asked to determine whether safety improvements are needed. Here's political reporter Katie Scotcher.
The Minister for Workplace Safety, Michael Wood, wants all ports to review their operations and provide assurances that the appropriate steps are being taken to minimise the risk of harm for all high-risk activities. He's also asking leaders in the sector to advise him on whether any regulatory changes are required. Mr Woods says Maritime New Zealand and WorkSafe will assess each of the 13 major international commercial ports around the country. He says there needs to be an immediate shift to a safety-first culture.
The police believe social media have helped to spark a spike in ram raids in Auckland and in other centres. At a media conference on the issue in Auckland this afternoon, Detective Inspector Karen Bright said most ram raid offenders are young and motivated by social media.
We know that some of these young people are posting their exploits on social media, and that's driving some of the offending. And that's certainly something that we are currently engaged with social media companies to try and deal with.
Karen Bright says the police are asking social media platforms to address the content of the posts and the exposure they get, rather than identify offenders. A court in military-ruled Myanmar has sentenced deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi to 5 years in prison. It's found her guilty in the first of a dozen corruption charges. World Watch's Max Toll reports.
Miss Suu Kyi led Myanmar for 5 years before being forced from power in a coup early last year. Since then, she's been detained and charged with at least 18 offences, all dismissed by the international community as farcical, as human rights groups demand her release. Yet, these charges carry a combined potential jail term of nearly 190 years. The military says she has violated electoral and state laws and accuses her of incitement and various forms of corruption.
In Pakistan, 3 Chinese language teachers and their Pakistani driver have been killed in a suspected suicide bombing in the southern city of Karachi. At least 4 others were injured when the blast ripped through their minibus near the university's Confucius Institute. The separatist Baloch Liberation Army, which opposes Chinese investment in Pakistan, says it attacked the vehicle. The group has targeted Chinese nationals several times, as has the Pakistani Taliban. A health ministry draft plan for tackling rising diabetes rates has experts worried little will change. The number of people with type 2 diabetes is expected to increase to as much as 430,000 by 2040. The draft sets out priority actions for improving care over the next 5 years, but experts say it lacks specific recommendations. Otago University professor Jim Mann says it's a wish list, and Diabetes New Zealand wants it shortened into a timeline of steps to be taken. The ministry says the plan sets out what's needed to improve care in partnership with Health New Zealand and the Māori Health Authority. And the new chair of Ngāti Kahungunu says his long-serving predecessor has been very supportive. In an election, Hastings District Councillor Baden Barber has unseated Ngāhiwi Tomoana, who chaired the North Island East Coast iwi for 26 years. Mr Barber says Mr Tomoana has a positive mindset and motivated him throughout the campaign. One moment, please. We seem to have lost that audio. Here it is.
We spoke together right at the beginning, and some words, he encouraged me then. But he said, if you want this, you need to come and take it. I'm not going to hand it over, and so you need to go hard. And, in respect to him, I went 100% glad to get the result.
Baden Barber says his main focus will be housing, health and the Three Waters issue. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, I'll be chatting to the wonderful Wendell Nissen, who has just released a new book called Natural Care, for all of us needing some comfort after 2 pretty tough years of COVID. The prize in our Wednesday night hump quiz is Who Lived There? The stories behind historic New Zealand buildings by Nicola McCloy and Jane King. And in the final episode of our Black Music in Europe series, Clark Peters looks at black music from France and Italy. That's Nights with me, Charlotte Ryan, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're with Nick Trubridge on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland, cloudy periods with the odd shower this evening. Showers are more frequent and heavier for a time tomorrow. For Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, fine spells increasing this afternoon. Isolated showers are possible in the east overnight tonight. From Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine, a few cloudy periods, the odd shower in Wellington today. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, a few showers becoming isolated tomorrow. For Nelson and Marlborough, fine, apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. Fine today for Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Areas of cloud tomorrow with a few showers about northern Westland and Bulla. For Canterbury, cloud is increasing and patchy drizzle about the foothills for a time today. Fine tomorrow. Otago and Southland, showers are retreating to the coast today and clearing tomorrow. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few light showers. It's 7 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Thanks, Evie. No mai hoki mai. The government has come out defending its MIQ program despite losing a High Court challenge launched by the grounded Kiwis group, representing New Zealanders stranded overseas and unable to come home. The High Court found that the MIQ system operated unjustly in some cases and that the so-called virtual lobby, which allocated MIQ spaces, operated like a lottery. It's also found that the emergency allocation process, which was supposed to help stranded and desperate Kiwis, was not run effectively. And in what is perhaps the most damning aspect of the finding, the court said that a more sophisticated system that better prioritised those with a right to return was reasonably available and would have met the government's public health strategy. One of those loudly calling for the government to change its MIQ settings was Sir Ian Taylor, and he joins me now. Sir Ian, can we start with the finding itself? You've had time to consume it. What do you make of it?
Well, I guess I shouldn't say I'm surprised that the government is coming out defending themselves again, but it's not a surprise to anyone who was involved in looking into MIQ. I think for me the biggest surprise is it had to go to court, and the judgment is what everybody has been saying. It was inhumane, it was wrong, and there was a way we could have handled it without throwing the borders open. Now, I mean, the thing that really has stood out for me, and I find really appalling, is that, the Radio New Zealand report that had to wait months to get through the Official Information Act, and found that Ministry of Health officials were recommending you do something about MIQ back in November. I looked at those dates, and those dates were matching the time we went and ran the trial using 3 New Zealand technologies, and came back and with a report from Ernst Young recommended to the government that there was a way to better handle this and start bringing our stranded Kiwis home before Christmas. And now we see that the ministry was advising that we should do something about it, and the government chose not to put the cross-sector border group had done this report together with the ministry to see if they could explore ways of doing it, and I think that is just criminal.
Yeah. And let's look at your the alternative method you mentioned, which was of course peer reviewed by EY. Tell us what that system entailed and why you believe it was a better option.
Well, it's easy to say better. What we were saying was, look, we will go, because we funded that and test ourselves. What we were saying is, look, if you can't do it, we'll go and trial a number of technologies, and then we'll bring them back and let's sit and have an open discussion, because MIQ is simply unjustified. Even while I was in the States, I had a call from a man who had lost his visa, had 3 children here. For 6 months, he could not work and had nowhere to live. That is criminal. It is inhumane, and we could have got him home. It just required a conversation. But basically, I think the biggest flaw in the entire approach was the testing regime. So they had one test, a PCR test, and they had to put MIQ in place because they didn't know who was coming across the border with COVID. So they locked them away and tested them with this test that took 3 to 4 days to get a result, when sitting in the background, they had been offered a test that 5 other countries are using, including Israel, that could give them a result in 30 minutes. Those were the tests we used. So I got on a plane an hour after taking a test that told me I didn't have COVID. That was the place we needed to clean the entry in the country. And then I was tested an hour after I got off the plane. And that's when you could move to self-isolation. If you tested positive, you'd have fewer people going into MIQ. These were the discussions we needed to have, and nobody wanted to talk about it.
And this, I suppose, this alternative system that's mentioned in the judgment, that would have prioritised people like the gentleman you've just mentioned, no work overseas, can't work overseas, and 3 kids at home for 6 months.
We should have. You saw in the report, the mother who couldn't get home to her son dying of cancer. That is inhumane. That is not us. And what was so frustrating is that We should have made that unacceptable in, society. Now, let's get all the powers together that we can, and let's figure out how we get those people home. That lottery system, they defend it still. That lottery system actually meant that if somebody wanted to go to Wimbledon, or go to a sport event or go for a holiday, they could just chuck their thing and they had the same chance of getting a return flight home as the mother whose son was dying of cancer. Yeah, it was just unacceptable. And I don't, I haven't heard their defence of it, but if I hear once more that MIQ saved lives under this, we should have been talking about saving lives and livelihoods, and the cost of not focusing on people's livelihoods, their mental health, what was happening to cancer people, those are going to be costing us for a very long time.
And so who do you think is ultimately, accountable here, Ian, and what should happen to those individuals?
That is such a good question. So we have seen this, the government I elected on the basis of its transparency. It was going to be transparent. This has taken months to bash down the doors of the OIA to even get this information. So transparency is gone. They ignored the advice of the experts. They said they were taking advice from experts. In November, experts were saying we can wind down MIQ. They ignored that. That was gone. So my next question really is, let's move to accountability. Who is going to be held accountable for this? Because someone must be. And I'll bet you my bottom dollar that no one is.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Sir Ian Taylor there, of course, well-known New Zealand businessman, one of the leading voices behind this alternative system that would have prioritised people that desperately needed to return to New Zealand. All right, faced with the growing impact of climate change, the government has released a 6-year plan discussing the thorny issue of whether some coastal areas should be abandoned altogether. Preparing for the impact of flooding, wildfires, droughts and sea level rises, it also raises the question about who will bear the cost if some areas are assessed as unlivable and residents need to be relocated. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
In the last 6 months or so, New Zealand's been battered by a series of floods and other severe weather events, causing destruction in many local communities.
We are feeling the impacts of climate change. It's not something that's in the future somewhere else with someone else anymore. It is clearly happening to us here and now.
Climate Change Minister James Shaw says the best thing to do is to reduce emissions. But he says the new plan lays out what has to be done to prepare for the impacts that can't now be avoided.
We know that there are tens of thousands of New Zealanders who are in properties that are exposed at risk in a number of ways, whether that's on the coast or on river plains and so on.
National MP Scott Simpson says it's a difficult conversation, but one that has to be had.
And it's better that we're having it later rather than not at all. What surprises me is that for a government that professes to be so focused on climate action, that they have been so late to the adaptation conversation.
Mayor of Bulla, Jamie Klein, says his region is seeing the impacts right now.
I'm a long-term local and we've seen multiple serious floods now, tidal surge inundations and 2 ex-tropical cyclone wind events, all within the last, say, 10 years. So it's quite clear that our climate is changing and the intensity of the events is getting greater and the impact on our people is significant.
And they'll be looking for advice on how at-risk residents could relocate.
It's not always immediately obvious where a community can relocate and maintain its community of interest, if you like. Then there's affordability. Parts of Bulla District are at the low end of the socioeconomic scale, and these people don't have the means to privately fund their own, say, rock protection walls and things like that.
But he says as a local authority, they won't be able to foot the bill alone. And Mr Klein says raising the likely scenarios with the homeowners themselves has to be approached carefully.
Their most significant financial commitment is often in their home. So they're delicate conversations and they're conversations that need to be had quite early with communities. But I mean, we absolutely need to start having them and need to have some solutions to put on the table as well.
Part of the plan is legislation for what's known as managed retreat, allowing those living in extremely exposed areas to relocate elsewhere over a planned period of time. National Scott Simpson says for many there are no great options that start with either shoring up or moving the house.
And the only other third option is to retreat. And of course, that's expensive, undesirable for many people, but will potentially be a stark reality for some.
James Shaw says local councils have already been given guidance, which, if disregarded, could expose them legally.
There is a risk to a council in approving a development in an area which they know is at risk because that information is publicly available and has been given to them specifically as local authorities.
Tim Grafton from the Insurance Council says insurance is still available everywhere in New Zealand, and as long as the risk is managed, that shouldn't have to change.
There is no sort of absolute defined trigger point that says insurance is withdrawn. The insurance is readily available now in high-risk flood areas and continues to be. What we need to be looking at is how to reduce those risks to tolerable levels.
Public consultation on the plan is open until the 4th of June.
It is 18 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Going, gone to a good cause. BNZ's art collection is about to be sold to fund a charitable foundation. The collection includes some of our most well-known artists like Colin McCann, Rita Angus and Gordon Walters as well. Kiwis will get a chance to see the artworks when they go on tour before they go under the hammer. And Charles Nino at Webb's Auction House says it'll easily be the biggest art auction Aotearoa has seen.
The collection was started in 1982, and what makes it different, what makes it really stand out from any other privately held collection of New Zealand art is that right then at the very beginning they enlisted the help, the advice of the legendary Wellington art dealer Peter McLevy, who was one of the key figures, basically built the market for contemporary art, to advise them to select all the works. And what he did is he really created basically a museum collection. Everything here is the best of the best.
Yeah, let's cut to the chase. This is what the people at home will want to know. Obviously, a lot of these pieces, all these pieces are being sold. So let's start with the whole hog. I mean, in total, how much do you think all of these pieces would be worth altogether?
It's difficult to say because of the fact that works like this really haven't been offered before. People haven't had the opportunity to buy something like this painting here behind me. There have been others, but this one, The Fugitive by Tony Thomason, is one of his very most regarded paintings. I mean, you can try and attach a price to it, but who knows? It's hard to say, but upwards of 10 million, I would say, and I'm probably being conservative.
Sorry, upwards of 10 million for that one behind you alone?
Sorry, for the whole collection. This one again will be very, very high value, but the whole collection is worth more than $10 million. It'll easily be the biggest art auction ever held in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. That 10 million, Charles, where's it going?
Where's it going? It's going to a foundation that the BNZ is establishing. So all of their proceeds are going to this foundation, a charitable foundation, to support organisations doing work in New Zealand communities. Webb's as well is contributing a significant portion of our fees to that foundation.
And why sell them off, Charles?
Why sell them off? Well, I think it just felt like time. There were I can't speak for the motivations, but I think it felt like the right time, and the funds are going to do very, very good work. But from from the moment of the auction night, from the moment the gavel goes down later this year, it'll become the job of many New Zealanders out there to now be the custodians of these. Really, these great cultural treasures.
You've spoken about the fugitive behind you there. Tell us about some of the other artists that are featured here. Some of the big names that people might know. I've got some on my bit of paper, but you can run through them.
Oh, it's really, I mean, it's as if, the stores to a major museum, the doors were opened up and we were granted access to the who's who of New Zealand art. There are a number of major works by Colin McCann, which will be the most valuable works by the artist ever to have been offered at auction. Major works by Gordon Walters, which again will be the most major works, the most significant works ever sold. Milan Merkosic, Robin White, Don Binney, the list goes on. It really is a who's who, the best of the best, and there is one opportunity to acquire them.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking at one of these Gordon Walters, for those who aren't watching, rather, it's sort of that lovely black and white with the koru on it. It's one that a lot of people will know. Tell us, I guess, how unprecedented this is. I mean, for example, have you and your work ever seen anything like this? How much of a big deal is this?
This is a big deal. I mean, this is the biggest event ever to happen in the art market. I'll tell you a little bit of a secret about art auctions, is that we spend most of our time trying to find the works to sell. The market is very strong, and the public is very interested in investing in art. And if you find the right works, you can sell them for phenomenal prices. Well, this is something that really only happens once in a lifetime, that this huge number of exceptional works come up at the same time. You mentioned the Gordon Walters, the black and white Gordon Walters. Well, it's one of those works where, often people come up and say, look, I'm really looking for a very nice black and white Gordon Walters. And, I definitely will always take the details, and they'll all be getting a call because we now have one, but they don't come up. They don't come up. It feels like they do because it's such iconic subject matter. It could almost be New Zealand's flag or, postage stamp or national emblem. They say so much about who we are, but they don't come up for sale. And it's extremely, extremely rare. It's really part of the fabric of who we are.
Where have they all been exactly? I mean, I assume they haven't been at a BNZ hanging behind the property finance unit or something like that. Where have they been? A basement somewhere, or where have they come from?
No, one of the fantastic things, and the BNZ have been such fantastic custodians of these works, and one of the fantastic things about the way in which they've handled and looked after the collection is that by and large all of the works have been on display all over the country, and I know that there's a lot of New Zealanders out there that have specific stories and experiences and memories that involve these works, and that is one of the things that makes it truly a national icon. The works have been a living part of people's lives for many, many years.
Charles Nino from Webb's Auction House there on what's set to be the largest art auction New Zealand has ever seen. And speaking of big, New Zealand has named one of the largest swimming teams ever from the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. A 12-strong team, including able-bodied and para-athletes, is headlined by the experienced Dame Sophie Pascoe, go Sophie, and Tokyo Olympics standout Lewis Clareburt as well. 7 swimmers will be competing at their first Commonwealth Games. Felicity Reid reports.
New Zealand's most decorated Paralympian Dame Sophie Pascoe will compete in only one event, the 100-metre freestyle S9, on the opening day of the Games. Having a lighter program is a change for the 29-year-old, who will be competing in her 3rd Commonwealth Games.
I just get to sit in the stands and actually enjoy watching everybody race, which is an unusual feeling for me because I usually obviously have a couple of events, which would mean that I would have to focus on myself and the preparations leading into an event, and you end up missing other people's races or having to watch them back in the village. So now that I actually get to be part of the team on pool deck supporting everyone, I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see what this group of athletes can do. I know it's a super strong team this year.
Pascoe, who recently split from her longtime coach, Rolly Crichton, will be in Birmingham without her new coach, Brett Naylor.
I think that shows, the maturity and the extent of how long I have been swimming, that I can actually, take control of myself, and that everything everything is on me, and I know that Brett will be back here, supporting me anyway. So it's going to be a new challenge in itself, and I think that's the exciting thing about, what keeps driving me forward. I have to constantly challenge myself to be a better athlete every year, and this is just one of those aspects that I have to focus on.
At the Games, which start on July 28th, the able-bodied and para-swimming programs will run side by side. Pascoe says the rise of the 4 para-athletes in the New Zealand team will be something to watch.
We're continuing to make progress on the New Zealand team every year, which I think this year we'll see some damage put in the pool against the Commonwealth, that's for sure.
Helena Gasson could be one of the busiest New Zealand athletes in the water. Gasson potentially will line up in 5 different events. But it wasn't long ago that she didn't know if she would represent New Zealand again.
It's been a very, very long last couple of years. 2 shoulder injuries and then missing the Olympics by 0.1. It's not easy to come back from that. So it's really it's a nice feeling to see the NZOC and Swimming New Zealand have faith in me to be able to compete in that many events.
Wellington's Lewis Clareburt is one of the more experienced swimmers named today. Clareburt says he's taken confidence from his Tokyo Olympic appearance, in which he made 2 finals. Clareburt heads to Birmingham looking to improve on the bronze medal he won at the Gold Coast 2018 Commonwealth Games. The 22-year-old says he's swimming 5 seconds faster than he was at this time 4 years ago, but knows he'll have to put in a record-breaking performance in his preferred event, the 400-metre individual medley.
The Commonwealth record was just broken sort of a couple of weeks ago, so it is going to be a fast race. There's going to be 4 or 5 guys vying for that gold medal. So it would be obviously pretty cool to get up on top of the podium, but I'm going to have to beat the Commonwealth record just to get on the podium itself.
Freestyle specialist and Tokyo Olympian Erica Fairweather will be competing at her first Commonwealth Games, as will Eve Thomas, who is the daughter of British swimmer Sarah Hardcastle, and 17-year-old para-athlete Joshua Wilmer is the youngest of the 7 debutants in the New Zealand squad.
Right, before we go, a little bit more of your feedback on the Ian Taylor interview. When did Ian Taylor become an epidemiologist, a virologist, a scientist of any description? I'll trust the experts to keep me safe. Thank you very much. That is from Frank. Kia ora, Ian Taylor, we should say, talks the truth. Let's officially quiz the government on COVID. Thank you, Anaru, for that one. And just before we go, Evening, Nick. I wish that Burma the elephant could be rehomed at my place. Unfortunately, pets are forbidden at the block of flats where I live. Tom, let's see if Auckland Zoo can work something out for them. Give them a call in the morning, perhaps. That's it from us tonight. First up is, of course, back tomorrow, where they're asking Auckland Transport whether more people have taken up half-price public transport fares over the school holidays.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The group Grounded Kiwis wants an inquiry into the government's pandemic response after winning a High Court case. Unions believe evidence from port workers will help to identify safety issues as an inquiry gets underway into deaths at Auckland and Lyttelton ports. The police